The word balance really is not a word I like to use. I like to use harmony and unforced rhythms of grace. And boundaries help us to establish those unforced rhythms of grace. Welcome back to another episode of Get Your Rear in Gear with Lori. I'm your host, Lori McAfee, and today we're going to be diving into the nitty-gritty of real life situations and how setting boundaries can actually bring you peace and balance that we crave in life. So, hey, buckle up and let's talk about real life freedom and joy that is found on the fringe of boundaries. Come on, y'all. I know that we've all had that one great Aunt Mildred who asked that very intrusive personal question about our life. And it's kind of like she had a radar and knew something before we did. How do we navigate that? And how do we maintain our sanity and the relationship during all that time? You know, maintaining sanity and preserving relationships is very difficult to do without boundaries. Y'all, boundaries is the secret sauce. So handling these real life situations, boundaries are the guideposts. They are the pillars of what help us to define what's acceptable and truly what's not acceptable. Boundaries are not being mean or being selfish. It's honoring ourselves and maintaining healthy connections with others. You know, the word boundaries is almost taboo. It's like something that we can't talk about. And therefore, we don't. So the crazy thing about it is, most of us don't have boundaries. We don't establish boundaries. And if they are established, they're in a controlling type way. So, what are boundaries? I always thought that, like I said, boundaries were some kind of rule or some kind of law, something very authoritative. And yes, while they may be viewed as something that's authoritative or controlling, the boundaries that we need to establish for ourselves is more about self-control. And for me, it was reclaiming my life and my health. I had to learn about boundaries the hard way. And at that point, when I had to learn about them, I was actually too tired to even care. As a young child, it's crazy because my parents would actually get on to me for allowing other people to run over me. So I stayed in more trouble for not having boundaries and not standing up for myself than I did anything else, even though I've kind of been a little bit of a rule follower. So I guess that's why boundaries, not a rule follower. So I guess that's why boundaries were something I didn't like, and I didn't see necessarily the need for them. And that spilled over into my adulthood. And then I learned the only way to not be able to have boundaries overtake me and how to have people to not run over me was just to walk away, no matter the cost. And thanks to knowing who I am and loving who I am, I've been able to establish very healthy boundaries. And I've gotten really good at honoring them. My mom actually said the other day, Lori, I can remember getting on to you for letting other people run over you. And now, girl, you hold your guns. And I'm proud of that. And I myself am proud of the boundaries that I have established. And it's kind of been a little bit of a transition for people to get used to with me setting those boundaries, because the thing that I've learned is that when the external chaos still goes on around you, when you have set boundaries for yourself and you've established those, that inner peace is something that can't be taken away, even when chaos goes on around you. My husband, he laughs at me whenever I communicate my boundaries in a in a loving, gentle, and respectful way to other people. And then he shakes his head as I step a little closer to communicate those boundaries because the fringe of my joy and freedom is being pushed back. And he knows that my peace is being affected. Then probably his peace is going to be affected too at that time. Now I've learned that guarding our soul with boundaries in relationships and situations, protecting who we are at the core, your essence, our innermost person, our emotional and our mental well-being from all the external influences that may impact us negatively and compromise our peace and our authenticity. I've had to guard that. And I've had to learn how boundaries guard our soul from that. Ephesians 3:16 actually talks about strengthen with might through his spirit in the inner man. God strengthens us by his spirit in our true selves. Isn't that crazy? That the closer we are to him and we know who we are in him, and that's part of being established in boundaries, then we're able to grow and to maintain our limits and our guidelines in various areas of our lives, maintain that sense of self-respect, emotional safety, and personal growth because we have established these boundaries. And we've also gotten in his word. And the more strengthened we are with the application of his word, the more our innermost being increases, the more we are truly who we are at the core. Enforcing boundaries, that is not declaring yourself a priority. It is not, it's a way of saying that there's value and there's prioritizing your needs, the values of your emotional health. It empowers you to create this space of self-care, personal growth, and healthy relationships while avoiding situations that are going to drain you and take away your sense of your self-worth. And that happens when we don't establish our boundaries in so many different aspects of our lives. And boundaries are not meant to build walls. Boundaries are meant to destroy them. And without boundaries, we actually isolate ourselves from everyone. And here's why. And I want you to think about this. Because our energy is being drained. Because it's going in all different kinds of directions at the same time, at different speeds, due to demands that, one, we put on ourselves, but two, that others have put on us. We retreat in isolation then, both internally and externally. And the wall that is destroyed by boundaries, that's used to build a bridge. And what it does is it fosters that healthy relationship, that healthy connection, while it protects our sacred space within our innermost being. By honoring our boundaries, we are able to maintain our most authentic person. And we engage in those healthy connections with others because we're who we truly are, and they know who we truly are because we've communicated that clearly. Boundaries are a courageous act of self-respect and self-care. And that actually offers a life that is more fulfilling, authentic, and very well balanced. Because the word balance really is not a word I like to use. I like to use harmony and unforced rhythms of grace. And boundaries help us to establish those unforced rhythms of grace, where life is a rhythm and it helps to flow like that. One of the most important things to remember about setting boundaries is that it's not punishing the other person or cutting them out of your life. Establishing boundaries is mostly about communicating. It's spoken in love with the other person and to yourself. Those who have healthy boundaries themselves, they're going to respect that and they're going to understand that. You are going to have some people who are going to push back at you. And, they're going to get offended whenever we have established boundaries. Because one thing that's done is that's actually taken their control of us away. And now we've taken on that responsibility that should have been ours in the first place. We've taken that responsibility for ourselves. And we are now saying that we are also worth setting these boundaries for and maintaining our health within our emotional, our mental, and our physical well-being. And so we have to still communicate those in love. And y'all, we can love people and still establish boundaries. We can love someone to the bitter ends of the earth and still maintain boundaries. If you're a people pleaser, like I was, recovering people pleaser now, then you've struggled. And I want you to know you're not alone, because it's so hard to set boundaries in our life when we are a people pleaser. But if we start taking these small steps in areas of our life that are most stressful, then we're able to establish these boundaries and we're able to honor them then. And so one of the ways that we can do that is like our personal boundaries. So we can honor ourselves by saying no when we feel overwhelmed or our time is being affected, our energy is being affected, because we're setting these clear boundaries. We establish the great groundwork of being respectful to ourselves. And again, that life that is in harmony with others in our relationships. And then speaking of relationships, boundaries need to be established in those as well. In a romantic relationship, in a friendship, in a family dynamics, boundaries are hard and they play a critical role for trust and respect. With boundaries for, romantically, we need to establish those right out of the gate, right up front, before we get very romantically involved with a person. We need to establish our boundaries with them. And for family, they need to understand those boundaries too. That can still be communicated in a very loving and respectful way. Do not have to be mean, and you do not have to be selfish in those boundaries, but you can honor those boundaries and you can let them know what your boundaries are, and they will honor them as well. And friendships, I think that there are some friendships that definitely no boundaries are established up front. And sometimes we go into relationships, especially in our friendships, and we just assume that that we're always going to be respected and our boundaries are going to be respected. And that's not always the case. And I have to go with my gut sometimes on how this friendship is, how it's playing out. And I have to make sure that I honor my boundaries that I have established for myself in that. And there may be a time when that friendship has to be not as close as it was at one time. And that's okay, because that is also honoring a boundary that I have. And we need to communicate these openly and authentically, have limitations. Like, I don't want someone to interrupt my time with my husband. So I may not answer the phone. I may not text you back. Most of the time, I don't even have my phone if he and I are in a conversation or we're spending, some quality time together. When my kids are around, I don't want to have my phone out in front of me. When my grandkids are with me, I don't want to have my phone out in front of me. Now, not all the time does that happen, because, we are human and things do happen, and sometimes I will have my phone out, but I don't like to, because I want to be fully present in the moment. And that's a boundary that I've established. And that's one that I try to protect and I try to maintain. And so this is, understanding. It's an atmosphere that we've created. And my kids know that. It's funny because when all of them come over and they know that we're going to be spending the weekend together or something, they're like, we better get all of our phone using out of the way, because Mimi doesn't want us to have our phones out. They know that. That's a boundary that they know, because that is time that we are to be fully present with each other. And so this paves the way for deeper and healthier communications. And healthy boundaries, it ensures us that we are able to feel valued ourselves and supported, and we don't compromise our innermost being. And that also helps us to maintain our mental, physical, and emotional well-being. And that will move us into emotional and breaking down those walls, like I talked about earlier. And we automatically put those walls up as a defense mechanism because of hurt that we've had in the past and vulnerabilities. And so these walls, they are genuine in emotional intimacy. They hinder the growth and meaning of our relationships because we've put them there to protect ourselves. But when we recognize the importance of setting that boundary, that's going to be able to dismantle that wall. And that is a key to building a healthy relationship is, those connections and tearing down those walls. And one thing that I've said in all relationships, and it goes back to personal boundaries and relationships and emotional, is that I would not allow people to love me. I would love what I said was no boundaries, but I didn't allow people in to love me. But what I've determined is that I had boundaries all around in every situation when it came to that. And what I did is once I established boundaries, I tore everything down and I tore those walls down. And that boundary that I had said was not there, I put a boundary there, but that boundary helped me to know and love who I was. And by doing that, I was able to be selfless. I was able to have that boundary and to respect myself enough and love myself enough to set that boundary while I was still deeply loving. It's vital that we practice self-awareness, self-discovery, that we're able to do honest self-reflection. Because in all these situations that I've talked about, identifying our core root cause of where these barriers have come from. A lot of it goes back to our self-worth and wanting to people please and our insecurities and our fears, but it ultimately leads to us having those walls. And whenever we establish these boundaries, we're able to tear these walls down, be vulnerable, and be more open in our relationships. Boundaries have the potential to strengthen and unite our connections. They are the bridges to building healthy relationships, fostering trust, empathy, and a mutual respect. So if we strive to set these boundaries, not walls, not barriers, but boundaries that are bridges, then that brings us closer together. And through this, we're able to understand each other, ourselves better, and we can create a more compassionate and interconnected about ourselves and with us and with others. And so I want to ask you, what boundaries do you need to put into place? What do you need to say no to? Do you have a loving conversation with someone who has been allowed too much access and given too much authority, given too much responsibility for you without giving yourself the same amount of responsibility? So take time to establish boundaries in your life so that your more positive relationships can grow with yourself and with others. So I want to thank you for joining me on this episode of Get Your Rear in Gear with Lori. And I hope that you are able to take away some value of establishing boundaries. Because remember, boundaries are not meant to build walls, but they're meant to destroy them.